Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session. As Anne was said, we'll just add a brief introduction for each one of the guests, if I may. So, Dr. Aleksandra Grabias was recently appointed to serve as the head of advisory council to the Polish Prosecutor General, counteracting hate speech and hate crime in Poland. And Hanna is president of the German Union of Jewish Students and vice president of the European Union for Jewish Students. And Jack Wallis will touch your book, Israelophobia, very soon. And I would like just to add regard Tom Khaled Würdemann, that he's here at the conference as a European Muslim who is engaged in the fight against Israel, hatred, and anti-Semitism. And with that, let's start our discussion. The title, if I may, is From Memory to Action, How to Act When Never Again is Now. And I assume I don't need to introduce what never again means for each and every one of us, one of the darkest time in history. But it has become, very associated with October the 7th, because I think many people believe that the promise of never again has been violated on October the 7th. And many think that what we have witnessed and suffered as Israelis, as Jews, does meet the criteria of another genocide for the Israeli and for the Jewish people. And I would like to ask the guest here and for you to bear in mind that we will try to deal and to see whether history repeats itself in the last couple of months or it's a total something new. And I would like to ask you, and maybe to start with you, Hanna, at our previous discussion, you have told me something that struck me. You have said you have your war in Israel, but you don't really understand what it is that we are going through. You told me it is a fight for survival, and that your life has changed completely, your personal life, since October 7, and you have arrived from Germany. So can you just describe to us what does it mean, a fight for survival?
First of all, shalom lekulam. I'm very happy to be here and to speak to all of you. I think it's a very tough phrase if you hear it without context, to say you have your war and we have our war. Of course, the wars we have are intertwined and you can't see one without the other one. But a diasporic Jewish perspective that is my mission to also bring to Israel is that Jewish students, especially since October 7th, I mean, anti-Semitism has been part of our reality, has been part of our daily life in Germany, in Europe, and all over the diaspora, long before October 7th. But what we are experiencing since October 7th is a whole new dimension. And that's why I say Israelis are fighting for their existence in Israel, and we are fighting on college campuses. We are fighting against an army that doesn't wear a uniform most of the time. We oftentimes don't understand or can't see from the beginning who is the enemy, because it comes in very different forms and shapes. But we are fighting a war against anti-Semitism. We are fighting a war against terror in Europe and in the diaspora as well. And what does that mean? You asked about the situation of Jews in Germany and Jewish students, particularly after October 7th. What we have observed is that anti-Semitism on college campuses became absolutely open. A lot of Jewish students don't feel safe to go to university. They only go if it's mandatory. I mean, I can tell you an anecdote. I came here 30 minutes in advance so that I can take a walk through a college campus where I don't have to be afraid that someone recognizes that I'm Jewish, where I don't have to be afraid that I might be harassed for being a Jew. And that's the situation. I think that says a lot about the situation of Jewish students across the globe. We feel like we have to hide our identity in order to be safe. We feel like, I mean, a lot of Jewish students said that they are hiding their Magen Davids. They're not wearing, if they did so before, they're not wearing a kippah. They are questioning, who does actually know that I'm Jewish? Who did I tell? When did I post it? We are experiencing demonstrations on campuses, so-called activists on campuses, calls for an intifada almost every single day, encampments, and a lot of the things that I'm pretty sure I don't have to describe in detail because you might all know them from the media. But on the other hand, and that's very important for me to say, there's often a prejudice of diasporic Jews being Jews with trembling knees, being Jews who hide behind their European identity. That's a stereotype. We are not that kind of Jew anymore. Because even though there's a feeling of insecurity, even though there's a feeling of fear that is constantly around us, and we feel socially isolated, and we feel like we lost friendships, allyships, and so on, we have never seen as many young Jews being so active, so resistant, so willing to fight for the state of Israel, for the release of all hostages, for their right to live in Europe, for their right to be equal citizens. And I think that's extremely powerful, that after October 7th, we've seen what kind of power we have in ourselves. And I wish we wouldn't have to need that power, but we've been fighting every day. Long time before October 7th, but especially after.
Jake, we are witnessing at least once a week big protest in the streets of London. And it seems that hate was there all the time and the war only gave it a legitimate and it has erupted. Is it based on race? We are Jewish. Is it based on nationality? Anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, or is it something else? Is it a Free Palestine movement or anti-the existence of Israel movement?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here, and very nice to see all of you here today. You started me with an easy question to try to explain this phenomenon of the huge protests that we have in London every other week. Not just in London, of course, in the United States, across Europe, across the world. I mean, October the 7th was, it was a moment where everything changed. You know, it's difficult to remember what it was like on October the 6th, for you, of course, but also for us overseas. And it was, in a way, it was very much the same. It was very familiar to Jews. You know, Jews, we have a long memory, and many of those memories include scenes like October the 7th, not just in the last 100 years, but in the last 1,000 years and further back. But the difference, it felt to me, was that normally throughout history you have a build-up of anti-Semitic feeling in society, low-level anti-Semitic prejudice that gets greater and greater and then explodes. But from the point of view of the diaspora, it felt like it was the other way around. There was this explosion of old-fashioned, if I can use that word, anti-Semitic terror and pogroms here, and that unleashed everyday low-level anti-Semitism across Europe and across the world. It felt like it was a reverse. And nowhere is that clearer than on the streets of London and elsewhere, week after week. What are these people doing? What do they think they're doing? And what are they doing? What are they playing at? It should be the most obvious case of good and bad. I couldn't imagine a more obvious example where you have the good guys and you have the bad guys. And yet you have this mixture of different demographics coming out on the streets, getting behind, either chanting slogans of murder, or getting behind it, or being happy to walk alongside it. And they think they're the good guys. And you know, there's a variety of reasons. There's a coalition. as a coalition of people. I've started to describe it as the new radicalism. The new radicalism it's a coalition of different people that are uniting behind one cause. And this includes Islamist extremists, and we have many of them in Britain, and you have in Germany and Poland and across the world, and of course you have them here too. But they have an alliance with the far left. The far left, the alliance takes place, the joining point is the idea of decolonization. You know, during the Algerian resistance, the expulsion of the French in Algeria, that was taken as a playbook, as an example of decolonization. It was, Frantz Fanon and Edward Said, all these intellectuals praised that as an example, which was used by the PLO, that you just need to attack the occupier enough and make life painful enough, and then they'll withdraw. They look at the Israelis, they think, well, the Jews for thousands of years have been driven out from country to country to country. Now they're here. All we need to do is use the Algerian model, make their life unbearable, and then we'll drive them out onto somewhere else, or back to Poland or where else? Back to quite. Anyway, so I don't want to take too much time, but there's the Islamists, there's the far left, and then there's all of this is knitted together by identity politics. You know, right now if you are on the left, if you're a young person and you're on the left and you're progressive, and you believe in transgender theory, and you believe in critical race theory, and you believe in radical climate theory, and you hate colonialism, you also hate Jews. It's part of the Palestinian flag, the Palestinian cause has become this symbol of all these different fashionable ideologies that are all uniting in this new radicalism. And it's not just Jews that are being targeted. It's not just Israel that's being targeted. When you have, in London, when we have those marches of hundreds of thousands of people, many of the organizers of these marches have links to Hamas, as we reported in my newspaper. But when they parade through London, they don't just attack Israel and Jews. They don't just call for intifada or from the river to the sea or whatever. They also, the police had to protect the statue of Winston Churchill. They had to protect the cenotaph, which is the memorial for our war dead over the two world wars.
They covered
the war memorial. And the police are attacked, and the Union flag is attacked. So, just in conclusion, Jews are attacked as the clearest expression of liberal democratic values. And this is the enemy. The enemy is it's within, in Western Europe, and it's against all of the values that unite us, and the Jews are simply first in the firing line.
I think at this point, as we approach 9 months of this war, if I may, we are well beyond the protest against the war or calls for a ceasefire. I can just give you an example from previous, 10 days. There's been video of people in Manhattan going on an underground and chanting, "Where are the Zionists? Who is here Zionist? Please raise your hand. It's your last call to leave." And houses, Jewish institutions are being marked. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Upside down triangle, red triangle, which is a sign of Hamas. They are being marked, private properties and institutions. And I really don't think Western countries have the right tools to confront the situation or the level of hate that we have reached. And this is where I turn to you, Aleksandra. Have you anticipated the scope of rise of anti-Semitism and what can be done on a legal level?
Thank you. First, I wanted to say I'm so happy to be here, and I always feel obliged to explain what am I doing here as a Pole, as a non-Jewish person, but as a proud member of International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. So that's my other affiliation, which also makes me come to this kind of gatherings and conferences. So from the legal point of view, both within academia and international human rights protection systems like the UN system, I would say that everything has changed. And this change, exactly like Hanna said, is being noticed in so many levels and in so many areas of law itself that it's really difficult to grasp and understand what's happening. But at the same time, I deeply feel, and I think this way, that we should stick to the law, to international human rights law standards, to actually demand the protection for the Jewish people. Because what we are witnessing is actually the process of leaving Jews without the protection of human rights law, which should be an obvious case. International human rights protection systems emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust. Now it turns out that actually the laws that protect minorities, that protect against hatred, do not apply to Jewish people anymore. And our task as lawyers is really to make these laws still work for the protection of Jews against anti-Semitism. And as in our International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, we are trying to do this also by helping and assisting Jewish students in Europe. And we are in collaboration with Hanna also and other Jewish organizations in Europe. But as I say, everything is changing in this area as well, and we have to find ways to reintroduce this protection to cover the fight against anti-Semitism. Because now it seems that fighting anti-Semitism is only limited to really extreme cases, and it's not really being applied to all these nuanced situations, or anti-Zionism as a phenomenon, it's being excluded from the legal protection. So our task is just to take care of this.
But let me ask this way. Do you see a scenario in which Western countries would agree to limit the scope of free speech in order to balance it with protecting minorities? Not everything can be said, not everything can be chanted, because when I speak with colleagues in the US, they say it's an absolute right. Everyone can say whatever's on your mind. They can scream from the river to the sea, and they can call for the destruction of the state of Israel, and it is still within the scope of free speech.
It's completely different in Europe. We have anti-hate speech laws, we have anti-hate crime laws, and actually these limits are placed in absolutely different place than in the US. So it's even more complicated and scary at the same time that these laws are not being applied right now. Of course, not always, and we can still, as lawyers, go to court or inform the prosecutor's office that there are instances of anti-Israeli hatred which should be qualified as anti-Semitism, etc. And the legal machinery should be then started and move on with the proper proceedings. But more and more often we are hearing that this is not anti-Semitism, which is forbidden. This is anti-Zionism, which should be treated differently. Well, this red line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism has been crossed so many times. But from the legal point of view, I agree that this is sometimes very difficult to find this balance and define this line. But our task is just to do so.
And Tom, you are trying to change the situation from within. Your work with the Muslim community in Germany, what can you tell us about it? What do you hear from our moderate Muslim? Do they participate in this protest? And how do they see what is going on around the world?
Yeah, thank you for having me at this conference. I don't work with moderate Muslims, with what you would call, and I would not call myself like this at all. What I do is, there are a lot of Muslims, Arabs, who would say, not a lot, but some would say, I'm pro-Israel, and I fight for the Jewish people, and then they go and take in the gratitude of Israelis or Jews. I'm not that kind of person, because I don't do pro-Israeli activism. I actually do pro-Palestinian activism, which means that I fight for what we need currently most, which is Palestinian politics and the support for Palestinian politics that is compatible with a peaceful life together in this land. That, I think, is the absolute imperative, and this is what we're lacking. In Germany, we're currently not really lacking pro-Israel activism. What we're lacking is any kind of activism for the Palestinian side that envisions a peaceful life together. That is what we're not really having a lot, and this is a problem. But that also means that most of my opinions would make many people in Israel rather angry, and that I also roll my eyes at many of the things that many of you would probably say, because my perspective is not the pro-Israeli Arab who smiles when you tell him that he does so great work, but it's actually a pro-Palestinian perspective. But that also gives me an opportunity, and that makes me probably my perspective valuable to you to hear still, which is that I work not with the people who wear the pin bring them back now, but I work with the people who scroll all day long through the Instagram and TikTok feeds where you see the pictures from Rafah. I work with the people who see the videos from Israeli soldiers who cry with luck when they burn down houses in Gaza, or who say we need to treat them like Amalek. This is the kind of pictures that many people in Europe, many young Muslims, many young people in general, see all day long. And I work with those kind of people to bring the message that even the most stark relationship of hatred cannot be overcome by just annihilating the enemy, that is Israel, but there must be the idea of peace. I'll give you an example. An example I often use when working with young Muslims in Germany is the genocide of Rwanda. How was the genocide of Rwanda solved? It was not solved by the destruction of the perpetrator group as a nation, as people, as a community, but by peace and reconciliation. And this is also the only acceptable, non-barbaric way to solve this conflict. And that, of course, goes on both sides. But I work with many people, many of them Muslim, who do not understand this. And this we can certainly describe as anti-Semitism, who think the solution to this conflict is to annihilate Israel. And I say, no, this conflict can be solved peacefully. Yeah? And I try to work against the anti-Semitic stereotypes that feed this idea that this conflict can only be solved through the eschatological overcoming, through the final victory against the big demonic enemy, which is from the playbook of old anti-Semitism. Yeah?
May I just ask,
Yeah.
You say that you're working with the people who see, whether it's a video coming from Rafah or Al Jazeera or any other, they only see the war in Gaza. But do they know? How do you explain to them what has brought us to declare a war in Gaza on October the 7th?
So, first of all, of course, also, Israelis don't see the pictures from Rafah in their own media a lot. But, of course, this is a very important part of what I do. I do show young people. I've showed school classes. I mean, of course, I give them a trigger warning, the video of Shani Look. Yeah, so I am really not shy when it comes to that. But I give you another example, because actually, when you see the picture...
Just to explain, Shani Look because she was a German citizen.
No, just because it's a horrible video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
I give an example. Most people who see the pictures from Rafah and identify with the people in those videos will not care so much about the videos from October 7th. Still, I show them, I tell them about October 7th, because that's absolutely necessary for them to understand. But I'm also prepared to acknowledge that it will probably not elicit the empathy that it probably should be. Again, I just ask yourself, how much sympathy and emotion does the pictures from Rafah create in your hearts? Yeah? That's not the matter here. That's not the matter. That's not the matter whether it's the same. Of course that's important. But maybe... I talk about the massacres in Syria. Actually, I talk about the massacres in Syria with young Muslims and tell them, what was your reaction to that? I'm fully aware of that. I did 2 years of journalistic work about the war in Syria. I know what happened there. And I sometimes even use videos from the civil war in Syria. When people come to me and tell me 40 beheaded babies, that was a Zionist lie. You know what I am? Well, I say, I'm prepared to answer, well, from the Syrian civil war, you also had many information about horrible atrocities that then turned out to be false because people in their horror misreported something. That's a human thing to do. That's not a Zionist lie. That is the horror of war, not making people flip out, or not flip out, that's a Germanism, make people have an emotional fit with horror. That happens to Muslims in Syria too when they reported false chemical attack. There were chemical attacks in Syria, but there were also many false claims of chemical attacks. You see? What?
10 million refugees, almost 1 million Syrians dead.
But that doesn't matter here. But that doesn't really matter. I can. Yeah. So what I do is I work with the people who have the most negative opinions on Israel. And there's no reason to tell them Israel is such a great country, Arabs can live in it freely, because they see the picture from Rafah and that structures their perspective. I tell them, even with those pictures, there cannot be a solution but peace. And you must be prepared for that, and you should not be the people who stand on the side and cheer for more violence when peace must eventually come, which is sadly what large parts of the pro-Palestinian movement are currently doing. They're not a movement for ceasefire, they're a movement for a war that they should win. I'm fully aware of that. But I need to fight with that. I had one more example, but I'm probably over my time.
We'll get to that. Jack, may I ask you, as someone who was an international correspondent as well, do you think Israel is losing the fight over the narrative in the international arena? And that's what, because it seemed, I don't remember seeing such a wave of hate against the state of Israel. And it's not only Europe, and it's not only America, it's also Australia and New Zealand and places that we have never thought that there will be such a scope. So what is it that we are doing wrong?
Yeah, I think that it's a very serious situation at the moment. And I think that it varies from country to country. But certainly there is a very loud minority that is entirely motivated by hatred for Israel and often hostility towards liberal democracy as a whole. And the problem these days is that if you're a minority who is very fanatical and committed, you have a huge megaphone of social media. Not only that, but you have hostile actors like the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and of course Hamas and their sympathizers, who are using social media to communicate and to inflame those movements. I mean, we've seen with the campus protests in America, you've seen the Ayatollah Khamenei praising them, and we've seen Hassan Nasrallah praising them. Well done, keep going. You know, you're on the right side of history. And so I think that, I mean, if you look in the United States, 80% of people are supportive of Israel, ordinary people, 80%. And it hasn't really changed across the war. But their voice, amazingly enough, is quieter than the people who are fanatically opposed to Israel. And over time, this makes a difference, particularly when we have elections coming up. You know, this is the year of elections in Britain, in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And so, President Biden is looking to Dearborn, Michigan. He's structuring his message to the Arab American community in Dearborn, Michigan because of the electoral maths. In the Labour Party in Britain, they're having to take account of the radical Islamists in the north because of their electoral mathematics. And so these social media fanaticisms do have an influence on politics, and therefore they are beginning to shape society.
And Hanna, Jack has mentioned the protest in campuses. Do you think that Israel neglect this arena not enough Israeli activity in the campuses, because there are many people, officials here say, either we have hugged the wrong side, the harsh right policies, evangelical and others in the US, or that we totally forgot to invest in the young generation, which are not only Jewish, mainly, okay, I see you nodding, you'll speak as well. Do you think that we are losing this battle with young generation? Because otherwise I can't explain how students from Ivy League universities would chant calls like we have seen in Columbia University and in France at the Sorbonne and other places across the world.
I think the cause for losing the young generation was actually pretty well just described by you. A lot of young people do get their information in certain bubbles. The algorithm doesn't work for us. A lot of people scroll on TikTok, on Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and they feed the same, or they consume the same information that they already believe in. Besides that, I mean, I believe, speaking for Europe, anti-Semitism, and I think also this was already previously described by you, it's not something that disappeared completely from Europe after World War II. Yes, Germany was defeated, but the ideology, it lived especially in the private sphere. And when we look at campus protests, in the 1970s, the first ambassador of Israel to Germany, to Western Germany, Asher Ben Natan, he wanted to give a lecture in Frankfurt at the university in the 1970s, and he couldn't because the students didn't let him, because they yelled so much, because he was a Zionist settler in their eyes. He was a racist, and all those narratives that we again see now. So there is a continuation of those narratives, of anti-Semitism, living inside of especially the private sphere, that sort of thinking in anti-Semitic codes, in anti-Semitic tropes. And now young people have found a language which collides with the theories they read, such as the theories you've mentioned. Now young people found a language which makes it socially acceptable for them to let out all this age-old anti-Semitism they've been carrying inside of them for generations. Because in Germany it's very socially unaccepted to say dirty Jew, but it's totally okay. It has become absolutely fine and some sort of a trend to speak about the dirty Zionists. And it's the same things in a new, what's the English word for it? In a new dress. It's old age stereotypes that haven't been tackled in the right way. Because Germany is the country of never again. Germany is the country that has always said that it's their the reason of the state. I don't know how to translate it, but like the one of the main the ethos, yeah, of the state to protect Israel, and that never again cannot ever happen again. But what we see is that that has become an empty phrase. Because on the 27th of January or on the 9th of November, important and very sad days of Jewish history, every politician will stand there and say never again and how important it is to save Jewish life. But when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, a lot of things that happened or that are slowly happening now after October 7th should have happened decades ago. And we don't have to wonder that we have the situation that we have right now, because, again, there has been this continuity and there was not enough of tachlis behind those words and too much performance behind this never again. So I would say that is the reason why we do lose the young people, because they have no understanding of their own anti-Semitic narratives that they're carrying around them. They have no understanding for the Jewish state. They have no understanding what Zionism means, but they also are not interested in this because they consume so much ideology, which has like a nice, let's say, Vogue layer on it. and they believe that it's a trend, it's part of being young and woke and left-wing nowadays to be anti-Zionist, and they don't understand it. Or if they understand it, they don't care. So it's a mix of ignorance and not having the knowledge.
As we're approaching the end, so we'll try final remarks for each and every one of you. Just please be brief. Where is it going? If we can start with you, Aleksandra. Is it going to get worse or better, and how should we tackle it?
My personal perspective and opinion is that it's going to be much worse. Unfortunately, because all what Hanna just said is right, and I don't see any way out from this younger generation being stuck and hypnotized with the narratives they are hearing. At the same time, we cannot give up. We are obliged to do whatever possible to change these narratives and to change the way also international law is being used. We can see this change also with the proceedings in the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. This change is also taking place there. So from the legal perspective, it's a huge responsibility and a huge task. So we cannot just accept what's happening. But I'm pessimistic, exactly because of the reasons that Hanna mentioned.
And Tom, may I ask you? People are saying all the students have been brainwashed, and this brainwash has been well funded by Qatar's money. Do you see any way to really create an honest dialogue between Muslims and Jewish in Germany or in other places around the world?
Since the time for our panel has almost been cut in half, right? We started with 35 minutes instead of an hour. I have to use my final remarks. This is related to what you say, to give you probably the one example of my work, which I wanted really to tell, of the work. This shall give you the idea that you have to think out of the box when you want to talk to audiences. I don't say you have to do this. I'm not saying you go over there and you talk to the Intifada demonstrators in this way. I don't know, but this is my community and my work. So I just give you an insight into that, give or take. When I try to, the first thing you need to do is you need to humanize even Israelis. Because usually they're not seen in a very human way, they're seen in a very demonic way. And I give you one example, it's called a paradoxical intervention in pedagogics that I use. I use this often, and this is a very successful kind of communication method I've had. I don't talk to them about how great Israel is, I tell them about Zionist hatred. How can telling young people, like young Muslims in a mosque that invited me, a Muslim Students Association, talking to them about Zionist hatred, help them to humanize and eventually accept coexistence of Israel and Palestine in the future more? Well, I tell them about you probably have read it in school, but they don't know it, the poem In the City of Slaughter by Nachman Chaim Bialik. It was written about the pogrom of Kishinev. And that's a damn angry poem. It's full of anger and hatred. And he channels his anger and hatred into Jewish self-defense, aka Zionism. And I tell to young people, young Muslims in Europe, who have also made experiences with discrimination, I've had friends of mine who were attacked after October 7th by white German men called terror bitch in front of the little children. That also happens. And I tell them, what would your reaction be in this situation? If you were Nachman Chaim Bialik and you saw such a pogrom happening to your people, would you be very nice and sweet? Or would you be angry and say, never again, self-defense now? And then there's a light of understanding often. And even though I talked about Zionist hatred, there's a movement towards the humanization of the Zionist enemy, who is always seen as a demonic overlord and not as people motivated by normal people emotions, normal human emotions. That's my example. I'm just finishing raw because I talked again too long, but I just wanted to give you this insight.
Jack, do you think it will be stayed at the level of street protests, marking houses, picking people on a subway, or it might influence world leaders. Does it enter Downing Street and influence their support, or limiting the support of the State of Israel? The same with the White House or Elysee Palace, as we have just seen this week being sanctioned by France. Do you see it stay outside the decision makers, or it does influence what is going on?
Well, I think it definitely does influence the decision makers. We've seen that happening already. How the Western support for Israel has fractured over the last 8 months because of the pressure from the public. I mean, my feeling is that one of the components which allows this radicalism amongst young people in the West is that they don't know what war is. Any war that Britain has fought and that the United States have fought have been thousands of miles away. We have lost any kind of folk memory of what it means to be under attack in your homes and to have to fight for survival. And you know, there have been some polls recently in Britain and also in other countries which have established that young people say they would not fight to defend their homes if they were invaded. The majority of young people in Britain and the States and elsewhere, they say they would not fight to defend their country. You know, in Britain recently, because of the threat of war from the Ukraine war and the alliance between the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, we face a lot of instability. The head of the army in the UK said there could have to be conscription like you have here, where young people have to go to the army. And there was so much mockery. People were laughing, people were making fun of the idea that the Prime Minister had to come out and say, don't worry, we're not going to do it. You can relax, leave us alone. And so I think that the beliefs that we have that are hostile to Israel, which I talk about as Israelophobia in my book, and all the other anti-Western beliefs, they are luxury beliefs. They're a luxury because they don't have to fight themselves, they're not under risk themselves, not under threat themselves. But if, God forbid, war comes to our country, which it's easier to imagine that than to imagine peace, given the state of the world now.
Well, it has come under ISIS. There were terror attacks. There was the Manchester...
That's terrorism.
You took the war to Mosul.
Sure, exactly right. But if war comes to our country, not just terrorism, if war comes to our country, if Russia... You know, it's easy to imagine... I mean, I don't want to talk too long, but it's easy to imagine, you know. China invades Taiwan. The Americans send some aircraft carriers there. Then Hezbollah attacks here. The Iranians attack here. And then the Americans are split. And then Russia invades Estonia, Moldova, or Poland and fires a missile. Poland. It's easy to imagine. And if it comes to our shores, I think suddenly there'll be a waking up of young people. Suddenly they'll realize enough with the luxury beliefs. And they'll realize that actually the true alliance is with the democracies around the world, most importantly Israel, which is on the front line. But until then, I'm pessimistic.
But let me make it a bit harder. Besides solidarity from Rishi Sunak or whoever will be the next prime minister, do you think it will reach the level of boycott, economic boycott, academic boycott, that Israel will be thrown out of international organization, or it will stay at the level of anti-Semitism and against the Jewish community?
I think it's difficult to predict, really. I mean, you know, you've got Keir Starmer, probably the next Prime Minister of the UK. In his manifesto is to recognise a state of Palestine before the conclusion of any peace agreements. You know, there's allowed calls for boycotts of Israel from within the Labour Party. But like I say, it's difficult to see which way it will go. I mean, I'm reminded of the Iranian attack on this country, which you will all remember much better than me. But you remember in April, was it April the 12th or something like that? The 14th. That at that point, in the preceding few days, there was this crescendo of hatred for Israel, if you remember. The pressure on Israel over Rafah and over... But then when the Iranian attack happened, there was a bit of a movement. There was a change. There was a growth in sympathy for Israel, because people suddenly... Not a big movement, but it was a movement.
24 hours.
24 hours. And so you can... You know, when people realise they're brought face to face with a wider reality, sometimes public opinion does change a little bit. So it's difficult to predict, I think. The question of sympathy. But I think overall, I would agree with you, Anna, that in the short and to medium term, I think they're not looking particularly bright.
Yeah. And Hanna, you've said, you told me people are considering to make Aliyah, many Jewish, or studying additional professional to make sure they can leave home, whether it's Germany or any other places. Can you elaborate? Is it only a thought or something that become practical?
As you say, speaking for a young Jewish generation in the diaspora, my friends and the people I represent are all in their 20s. And of course, when you're in your 20s, you think about where do I build my future, how's my career going to continue, where am I about to found a family. And the young Jewish generation of Europe is thinking, what kind of skills do I have to learn now that make it possible for me to work in Israel, for example? What kind of language do I have to learn now so that if I have to leave, I will be okay? And of course, a lot of people are considering Aliyah. Some people already did Aliyah, but the thought of the day that I have to leave might come. The preparations for it are made. And I think that's scary and it's sad and it's painful that young people who are in their 20s, who have already built something, who want to have a normal life like every 20-year-old, they have to deal with all those questions that are a burden, like where's my home? Where am I gonna be in 10 years? And I think you can relate to this, but in another way. But for the Jews in the diaspora, it's painful because also what you said about the self-defense as a resistance, a lot of us come from families that are deeply affected by the Shoah. And on top of that, 90% of the Jews in Germany came to Germany in the 90s from the former Soviet Union. 90%, so the vast majority of the Jews in Germany. So that means that the histories of our families are already full with leaving, being persecuted, and especially in my case, my parents came from Belarus, from the so-called last dictatorship in Europe, because they wanted a better future for their kids, a safer future for their kids. And the fact that me, as a 26-year-old now, have to consider maybe it was all for nothing and I have to move again in order to be safe, that's something that keeps the young Jews in Germany awake at night. And I will add one last sentence. We don't want to become the generation of our grandparents who experienced the Shoah, and we don't want to become the generation of our parents who experienced the anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. We have learned to be proud Jews. And thank God we did. And we want to fight and we want to be resistant. But with everything going on, we're coming closer to this identity that we know from generations before us. And I think that's another thing that's extremely painful. And the only answer to this is why it needs a Jewish state that is strong, that is united, that stands, and that makes sure that Jews not only in Israel can be safe and live in peace, also not only Jews, but everyone who lives here, but also that the Jews in the diaspora can be safe because we know that Israel stands by our side as much as we stand on the side of Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Hanna, Tom, and Aleksandra. I would like just to conclude by saying that although Israel fighting multiple fronts, in the north, in the south, we have the Houthis and we have Iraq as well. I think this is a front that we should pay much more attention to, not to forget about the diaspora. I think the government should fund national policy, how to help them, and I really hope we should pay much more attention to what they are saying and especially what they are going through. Thank you very much.